Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Walter and Leonore Annenberg Theater at the Newseum. I'm Peter Pritchard, Chairman and CEO of the Newseum. We're starting a little late because Judy Woodruff, our moderator, was doing the NewsHour over in Arlington, and we want to make sure that she gets here through the Washington traffic, but we think she's going to do it, so we'll go ahead. I want to extend a special welcome tonight to our Press Pass members, our friends of the First Amendment Society members, and our donors, all of whom are deeply invested in the Newseum and its important mission to support a free and fair press and all of the freedoms of the First Amendment. If you're not yet a member of the Newseum, I encourage you to sign up. You know that just about every day in my job, I have the privilege of getting to walk around this museum, and I almost always see something worth remembering. Sometimes it's something amusing. Sometimes it's something uplifting. And of course, because we have a lot of emotional content, sometimes I see something that's very moving. Yesterday on my walk, I happened to stop at the World Press Freedom Gallery, and I read again the words of James Foley, his farewell message, as it turned out. His words, which a fellow prisoner memorized and brought to the world when that prisoner was released. It is a message that tears at your heart, and of course it reminds us again how very dangerous it sometimes is to be a journalist in our troubled world today, and how incredibly courageous these people are who volunteer to go to war zones to bring us news. The statistics tell one part of the story. Our partner in this program tonight, the Committee to Protect Journalists, which does so much to try to protect journalists, estimates that there were more than 60 journalists killed around the world last year, and more than 200 are in captivity now. And James Foley's last message tells another part of the story. Dear family and friends, I remember going to the mall with Dad, a very long bike ride with Mom. I remember so many great family times that take me away from this prison. Dreams of family and friends take me away, and happiness fills my heart. I know you are thinking of me and praying for me, and I am so thankful. I really feel I can touch you even in this darkness when I pray. Now, I think it would be right for us if we just take a moment of silence, please, to think about James Foley and Austin Tice and all of the other innocent people who are captives tonight or have lost their lives trying to report from these dangerous places. Thank you. Now I'd like to thank CPJ for being our partner in this program. No organization does more to call attention to the threats to journalists than CPJ. Our program tonight will examine those threats in some detail, and we'll also look at the new strategies that terrorists and despots are using to suppress the information that they don't like. We're also very honored to be joined by the mothers of James Foley and Austin Tice, Diane Foley and Debra Tice. As you know, Diane's son, James, who was a courageous photographer, was murdered by criminals from the so-called Islamic State last August. And Debra Tice is the mother of Austin Tice, a former Marine captain who was working in Syria as a freelance journalist for the Post, the Washington Post, and McClatchy when he was kidnapped in 2012. After this program, we would invite you to learn more about the Free Austin Tice campaign that has been launched by Reporters Without Borders. Outside the theater, there will be a photo booth, and we're encouraging visitors to take part in the Blindfold Pledge campaign in support of bringing Austin home. And there will be a representative of Reporters Without Borders to explain that. Judy Woodruff, co-anchor and managing editor of the PBS NewsHour, will lead our conversation with Diane and Debra. And after that, she will talk with experts about the growing threats to journalists. That panel includes Kathleen Carroll, executive editor of the Associated Press, which probably has more journalists around the world than almost any news organization. Douglas France, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs, and Joel Simon, Executive Director of the Committee to Protect Journalists. We're going to begin our program with 2 8-minute videos that tell us more about James Foley and Austin Tice. The piece about James was produced by Matthew Gear, and the video about Austin was made by Jared Christopher, who is with us tonight. Could we please roll the video? Please welcome Judy Woodruff and Diane Foley and Debra Tice.
Where do you want us to set? Is it here? Okay. Great, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter Pritchard. I am just so honored to have been asked to be part of this discussion, and so honored to be here with the mothers of these 2 remarkable journalists. We've just been hearing their stories, and I think no one in this room can imagine what the 2 of you have been through. We cannot put ourselves in your shoes, in your hearts, but we're here to hear your story and to spend the next 20 or 30 minutes talking to you about what it's been for you, what it's been like for you, and what kind of work you continue to do on behalf of not just your son, but the memory of your son, and to talk to you about what other efforts are underway on the part of journalists, the government, and so forth. You already heard Peter say earlier when he introduced tonight that journalists are under threat around the world in a way they didn't used to be. It used to be journalists were considered the neutral arbiters. They were off limits. But that's changed, and we've seen it changed in a really terrible way, and we've seen even more evidence of it just in the last few days. And it is Islamic State, but in so many other countries. Journalists are being held in prison. They are under threat. But what I want to talk to the 2 of you about, and Debra Tice, let me start with you. You're here in Washington. We've seen you've made several trips to the region to try to get more information about your son. What can you share with us now about where things stand, whether you feel there's any more information coming out? What do you know? What do you want to know? Obviously, you want to know where he is.
Right. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to the Newseum, and thank you to you, Judy, for hosting us tonight. We really appreciate that. And Mark and I are in the city for a week, and we always sort of have to gird our loins when we're coming inside the Beltway because it is just so intense when we're here. And, in the beginning, we worked primarily just to get Austin home, and that is still our primary objective. But over these past 905 days, now we're called to work on the hostage policy review. We're very committed to that with the Foley family and other families. We are committed that no other family will experience this in the way that we have.
And when you say hostage policy review, who's involved in that?
It's being led by, Mark always has to help me with this, National Counterterrorism Center. And they are preparing a policy to put on our president's desk about how hostage situations will be handled from here on out.
And do you feel you have input? I mean, you're part of these meetings, these conversations?
Well, I will tell you that when we had our meeting on Monday morning, we made it very clear that we were not volunteering, that we were investing our time, and that we expect a return on our investment. So we are in, and we do want to make it effective and meaningful.
And Diane Foley, you've been involved in this as long as Debra Tice, because your son Jim was taken
a few months after Austin.
A few months after Austin. And we know that Jim is no longer with us. How would you describe your efforts now, after what happened?
Well, Jim really believed in America. He was an idealist, really hoped till the very end that our government would find a way to free them. So part of what I feel compelled to do, truly, is to continue Jim's work. He would want to right this wrong. As Americans, we can do better, Judy. Our government can do better, our press can do better, families and government can communicate better. We can do better. And I fear with the threat of so many groups realizing that by kidnapping people, they can get money and publicity, that I fear this issue is going to be with us for a while. So I really feel, I hope part of Jim's legacy can be to stimulate this discussion and to advocate for a clearer policy that will bring our citizens home.
Let me ask you both. I know that you talked about this in the films that we just saw. How did both of you feel when you knew that your sons had chosen to go as journalists into an area that was difficult for journalists? I mean, what kinds of things were going through your minds, and how do you look back on that period? Debra and Diane.
Well, I guess for me, we have three of our children are in the military. So, you know, we understand Jim wanted to serve his country in a different way. He wanted to know the stories of what truly is happening in conflict zones. So I must admit, I think in the beginning we were just very proud of what he was doing. It was as we came to understand how incredibly dangerous it was for a freelancer. I mean, I had no idea. That I began to, you know, try to talk Jim out of it. I mean, he would keep in good touch, as did Austin, call often and visit often. When we didn't hear from him that Thanksgiving Day, I feared something was wrong, Judy, you know.
And what about you, Debra? What kinds of things were going through your mind? What kind of conversations?
Well, this was
Having?
spring semester of his second year of law school. So this is the time when law students are thinking about that really fabulous internship, you know, that's going to launch them, right?
And he's at Georgetown.
And he's at Georgetown Law. And he says, you know, I know you're not going to like this, but I've decided that I'm going to spend my summer going as a photojournalist to Syria. You know, and I'm thinking, you're going to give up a yacht in the Caribbean for war reporting, you know? And anyway, but there was no talking him out of it. That wasn't an option. He was telling us what he was going to do. So, you know, you just let the butterflies fly and the knots wind themselves up and ask, what can we do to make this as successful as possible? How do we support you?
And we just heard Diane say, you didn't realize how, as a freelancer, it's even if you're working at times for different news organizations, how complicated it is to think about security. How did you come to think about that, Diane?
Well, I came to learn a lot of issues just from Jim's struggles. You know, being a freelancer is not only risky, but you become poverty-stricken. You're taking risks to tell the world, to share these stories, but the people you want to sell them to may not even be interested, kind of thing. Jim, you know, I learned a lot of things, and they certainly, you know, a lot of the news organizations welcomed their work, but told them up front that they weren't responsible for safety or any of that.
And how did you come to understand that, about the kind of protection or oversight there would be? for Austin?
I didn't
when you
even know enough about how all of that worked to even have the right questions. Those are things that we've only learned since he's been missing. And I would just like to say, you know, Austin primarily worked for McClatchy News. They have been with us from day one. Anything that we could have thought of needing or wanting in our effort to get Austin home, they are always right with us. So they have been, I think, the exception to what you've been hearing about how freelancers are treated. We have been very fortunate in not experiencing that at all.
Did you have many conversations about that with him? Both of you, did you have conversations with your son about protection, about security ahead of time?
Well, I, like Debbie, I think, you know, was quite naive in many ways as a mom. You know, I was trusting Jim's judgment. Jim had been to many, to risk training. He'd been to training here in the Washington area, also in London. He was doing everything that he thought. I mean, I was trusting, you know, Jim had gone to the Medill School of Journalism, and I really feel they did prepare him very well. He was very proud of his you know, work there, what he learned there, and Global Post also stepped up for Jim as a freelancer. And Global Post was only one of his outlets, you know, so, but it was the only one that did step up. And so they, you know, certainly were there for us and did their best, had their insurance pay for a security team to look for him, which is unheard of. So they very much stepped up. So we were blessed too in that way.
Were there those kinds of conversations, or did you have that kind of awareness
No.
while he
He
was
might
there?
have had those conversations with his dad.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't be the kind of thing he would want to talk to me about.
That's so true.
Understandably.
So true.
There are things you don't want to,
So
being
true.
a mother of two sons and a daughter, there's some things
That's right.
Right.
moms aren't
Very true.
part of those conversations.
Yeah.
What do you want the American people to know, Debra Tice, about what is going on now, the efforts being made? I mean, you've gone to the region. How much can you say about what you've done when you've been there, people you've talked to, whether you feel you're being heard?
We are being heard. You know, there are people on both sides of the ocean that are very aware of Austin's situation. The Syrian government has told us that they will do what they can to find Austin and return him safely to us. Our government has also assured us that they will put their full resources behind that. The problem is they're not speaking to each other. So, you know, here they share this common objective and they're saying the same thing to us, but they're not saying it to each other. So we've got to figure out some way to make that connection. And I think that is the biggest challenge that we face. And what I want people to do, we're fixing to launch a big awareness campaign for journalists missing, focused on Austin, but really an awareness of the threats and the dangers that journalists embrace. They don't just face them, they embrace them to bring the news. And I just want people to really urge our president to bring Austin home, safest and soonest.
Do you think you have a good understanding of who or what group is holding him?
No. We know that it is unlikely to be an opposition group. We don't think it's the Syrian government. They have denied holding him. Right. So that just leaves the question of who is holding Austin.
But you have been able to talk to them. And how difficult was that to arrange?
Challenging. It was challenging. But once we got in the door, you know, and they realized that we were just mom and dad just looking for our son, we received the typical Abramic hospitality, and they really warmed up to us.
And everything you're doing, I assume you're sharing with the U.S. government, and you said they're not the U.S. government isn't talking to the Syrian government. We know that, but Are you telling them what you're telling us, that
Well, we're sort of pushing on both ends. Yeah. How about one chat? How about a single item agenda?
Diane, what about you? What do you want the American people to know about this process that
Well,
you're working on now?
About the American hostage
Yeah.
situation? Well, I think the American public needs to realize that there are many important issues, like the fact that for many of the American families who were held captive with Jim, the whole news of their capture was in blackout. That was what was recommended to all of us, to not talk to media, not tell anybody that they're captive. Well, issues like blackouts, issues like our policies, really, I just really think Americans need to reflect on these issues and need to be aware that this issue of being kidnapped is not just for journalists. I mean, it's for aid workers. It's for any tourist who might end up in the wrong place. It's an issue, obviously, that a lot of these groups is finding quite lucrative and good for their agenda. So it could happen to any American. And I think Americans need to realize that, what is an American citizen worth in our country? I mean, what type of priority? I think our country needs to decide that. The people need to know. We did not feel Jim was a very high priority. And I did all I could. I really did. Our sons did. I mean, we talked to everyone. We kept coming to Washington on our own and run around. We had a huge run around between the sent to the state, sent to FBI. We did it all, did all we could do. I went to France and London several times, trying to see how we could collaborate, especially once I knew Jim was with other Westerners. But there was a huge problem in communication, Judy. There was a communication problem within our government. FBI working on our case wasn't communicating with state, et cetera. There was poor communication with the White House on issues. There was no communication to us as a family. Everything was classified. We were privy to nothing. No information was given to us at all. Just trust. Don't talk to the media. Trust in us. Jim's a high priority. And we did trust for a whole year. And then we finally realized that we were more and more on our own. And the other area where there was a problem with communication is there really wasn't much communication between our allies. I mean, here Jim was being held with 17 other Western journalists and aid workers. Our allies, the French, the British, so many of our best allies, right? But I was so dismayed to see that our government and their government, we were not engaging. Everyone was doing their own thing. So we can do better, Judy. We can do much better. And part of Jim's legacy is to make sure that we do. The American public needs to be aware that this didn't go well.
Let me ask you to clarify something. You said you referred several times to the fact the government said, keep it quiet. We don't want you talking about this. We think that's the best policy. Right now, we know there's very little information. We know there's at least one American being held, an aid worker,
Austin.
a woman.
Besides Austin.
But I mean, the woman, and it's been in the news, but only that very little bit. Are you saying it makes more sense and would be more productive to have more information?
Well, Judy, not one scenario doesn't fit all. I mean, every family should have the option. I mean, if this family has chosen to protect their daughter in this way, and I respect that. However, I think what concerns me is one policy does not fit us all. This recommendation of blackout isn't right for every situation. I personally regret that we did not enlist more of our friends in the media to help us to keep the issue alive. Most Americans had no idea that there were 6 Americans and more in Syria. No idea. And that's not right. I mean, I think there's no way our country can stay free if they don't know what's going on. You know what I mean? And it also made it more dangerous for journalists like us and others.
How do you think about all this, Deborah?
As far as blackout,
And as
I
far as that,
agree.
and just the experience you've had working with the government.
We've had some of the same experiences. We do have a really good relationship with the State Department. We're very, very fortunate that our Congressman, Al Green, is just completely available to us. Anything that we ask of him, he is willing. Our Senator Cornyn, as you saw, he's in anything, same with his office, always available. We can always ask him. We've had more issues with the FBI. You know, they tend to be sort of an information vacuum. They want information from us. They take that information and we never get any feedback. And they don't share information with us, and so our relationship with them has become a bit acrimonious in a sort of middle school kind of way, unfortunately. And
People know what that means, I think.
yeah, I think people know what that means. So, you know, I think they're doing all that they can according to their own restrictions, and then they could sort of loosen their own restrictions and do more. And we'll always feel they can do more until I have my arms around my son again. You know, that will be the ultimate proof. As far as blackout, I totally agree with Diane. We just can't have rules that say, in this situation, it's what we do. We need to say, in this situation, as the smartest, most powerful nation on earth, we are able to analyze and really think this through and come up with the very best way of responding so that we become the people who respond and not the people that react. And I just think that's so important. And that's really what we want to get from this policy.
What more do both of you believe the government should have done, should be doing now? And I'll throw media organizations into it as well, but you're focusing much of your attention now on the government. What more
It's both.
should be done, could be done, do you think?
I think I'm hoping, Judy, that we can all learn from this. I'm very heartened by the hostage review by the NCTC, because that gives me hope that we can have a unit or group of people truly accountable for American citizens who are kidnapped. That was not what I found. That was not the case in our situation at all. No one was accountable. Very few were clear about what they would do for us. They kept telling us that Jim was the highest priority. Just trust, it'll take time, we'll get him home. And it's nobody's fault. It's just our bureaucracy didn't work for us. They didn't work for Jim. And I know we can do better. I'm hopeful about the hostage review. I'm very thankful they're doing that. I think as a country, our media can be more helpful. And that's why I'm so grateful to the Newseum and to you, Judy, because there are some courageous groups that did stand up and help, like the people who've helped Debbie, like the people who've helped us, like David Bradley of The Atlantic. There are some outstanding people out there, David Rode of Reuters. There are some courageous journalists out there who are willing to engage as people because they care. And not worried about the turf wars. There's a lot of competition, obviously, in the American media. And there's a lot of issues. It's more complex. It's way above my head. But all I know is that we could learn from other countries. I learned much in France about how their press really helps at so many levels to advocate for their colleagues. I learned from the British how their hostage UK nonprofit really treated the families in a way such that they were privy to information that Debbie and I, no way. You know, our government wasn't going to tell us anything. And I mean, I didn't know that Jim was killed until a hysterical AP reporter called me. That's how I found out that Jim was killed, okay? And we never heard from FBI or anybody all that day. No one called to authenticate it. We knew it was true when the president came on CNN or wherever. That's unacceptable, Judy. I mean, I'm sorry, you know, but we can do better than that, Judy. That's you know, our government, it's fine if they're not gonna, if our government decides that they cannot give the priority to every American citizen, I get that, but then be clear to us as a family, not tell us to trust them and that highest priority when that's not the truth. I mean, I think American citizens, families should have the respect to at least be fair and clear what we can do, what we can't, you know, and share information that could have saved Jim's life.
Right.
Our FBI and group knew things, because 2 people dared to share with me at different times. They knew where Jim was within 6 months of his capture. But they would not give us any actionable information for our security team.
They did make the rescue.
Yeah, after every other country had negotiated their citizens out, yeah. And it failed because they didn't have the right intelligence. They didn't have enough information to make it really work. So if that's the best we can do, that's pretty sad, Judy.
What more, Debra, from your and Mark's, your husband's perspective, should the government be doing? Could it be doing? What more are you asking?
Well, you know, I don't believe in not speaking. I don't think that's an effective form of diplomacy. You know, how do you resolve your differences if you're not speaking? So, you know, that's been a frustration that we've had since Austin went missing. As far as media, we are thrilled that Reporters Without Borders has taken the lead on opening up this big awareness campaign for Austin and for journalists missing. And we are amplifying our voice, and we just are asking people to urge our president to do everything possible to bring Austin safely home. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And the one issue that's been in the news a lot is whether governments should be prepared to pay or not. Where do the two of you come on that?
Well, I totally agree with what Debbie says, in that we need to be able to engage our enemies. To ignore them and is foolish. What do I know, right? I'm a mom. But does that make sense to you? I mean, how can we work out our differences, protect ourselves, if we won't even know who the enemy is, what they're thinking, what they're doing? This changed after 9/11. Our FBI was allowed to do big-time negotiation. Gary Nosner would tell you that anytime in his book. He's been a real advocate for us. So this was a shift after 9/11, and I'm sure there were good reasons. A lot of people know more than I. But it doesn't make sense to me that no one would talk to Jim's captors. Debbie hasn't had the opportunity, but we've had at least 2 very vital opportunities. For a month, the captors were emailing us, and FBI was not able to negotiate. We had to negotiate as a family. well, we're not negotiators. I had no idea what I was doing. And that angered the captors. So that was our first chance. And the next chance was when the European hostages started being freed. Many of them came out with incredible information. And our government wouldn't engage with those governments at a high enough level so that our FBI, nobody could even connect with hostages.
How do you, where do you and your husband come down on this question of whether governments should be prepared to?
I think that, you know, we've got offshore investing in this country. So I think there are ways of moving money around without saying the government paid ransom. I just have an idea about that. So I think that when you're looking at your primary objective is to get your person safely home as soon as possible, every option is on the table, and you can be very clever at how you exercise your options.
Well, it is an honor to speak with the two of you, Debra Tice,
Thank
Diane
you.
Foley.
Thank
We
you
thank
so
you
much,
very much for
Judy.
sharing your story and for talking with us. Let's give them
Thank you for
our
listening.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.